Okay, so I call this from street art to high art, like classical art, and then art that's like about things that are happening today between the borders. And we're gonna start. Wait, is this? Wait, escape. Yeah, this is the one. Okay, what are you guys looking at now? I just lost you.
We're looking at you now.
Oh, great. Escape. Let's see here. All right. Big money, big money, big money. Let's see if this works. Okay, let's see. Screen sharing. Ah. Now what?
We're looking at one slide.
Okay.
One slide.
We're good. Thank you, Jason. Okay, so I have to, I don't know. Okay. So one of the things that art that is interesting in Central America does is it gives voice to the voiceless. So Central America has been made of oligarchs, Latin America in general, and America is becoming that way too. So we can't be like, aha, we weren't. But America supported this. So once the Spanish left, they kind of left some Europeans there who took like land, like the coffee plantations that were run by, that were indigenous land. And then they took it over and planted coffee and stuff. And so and this is Honduras, Nicaragua, Guatemala, El Salvador, and there were a few people in the ruling class, and you can say this, it's very specific to Central America. South America is similar, but it didn't have this same kind of farming situation. So Central Americans, they're divided by countries, but it's the story is very similar. I know wealthy people from Central America that I went to a boarding school. People flew in from all the world and sent their kids there. And they'd say they were Guatemalan or Dominican, but they'd be blonde hair and blue-eyed, and they would fly to Paris to go shopping. And I know that is not how, now I learned, that's not how people were living. And before my time in the 80s, the wealthy people were fine, but there were debts that the country owed, all of these countries owed to the World Bank, and something called, it starts with an F, Federal Monetary Fund. It's like the World Bank, but it's less transparent. And these well-intentioned economists from the United States or from the world were like, well, you can pay back your money by single crop agriculture, or Dole Fruit Company will come in and take the land and clear cut and do monocrop, which is actually very bad for the soil. And you can pay us back, or whatever. And so, this is kind of the economic unrest. And then what happened was, I'll just move forward. This is kind of, you would get, I'm going to go back. This is only confusing. You would get these paramilitary groups like that the US CIA supported in all of these countries. They called death bans. They need to get the indigenous off their land. so that they could do this, you know, and this is just one example. So getting indigenous off their land, or say indigenous wanting, you know, etc., caused brutal civil wars from starting early in the 50s and 60s and not ending till the early 90s, 91, 92, 92 in El Salvador, different periods. Brutal, mostly indigenous death. And to make it palatable to the US, you know, Reagan and a lot of the Americans said, oh, well, they're communists. Okay, first of all, communism is a European concept that has to do with industrialization and people not being connected to their work. These people might have, you know, something nice about communal living, but they weren't communists. They were people trying to stick up for their land and stick up for their rights under extremely oppressive regimes that became military regimes. Now, the wealthy never had a problem, but people started dying throughout the 70s and 80s, and in Latin America, in Chile and Argentina, for other reasons, not these reasons. There were also military coups that killed students, killed, it's just horrible. They did everything. I used to write letters for disappeared, and some of the most disappeared were priests and nuns coming from America, working down there with the indigenous people. Who worked with the indigenous people would be disappeared, never found again. And I could just take any one of these countries and give you an example, and it fits, it reads. There's a great movie that's hard to find called Men with Guns, and it's about like an unnamed Central American country where the indigenous are like kind of moving up into the mountains to get away from these paramilitary groups. Paramilitary groups mean militaries that are like paid, and often the CIA backed. So a lot of like mixing going on. It wasn't clean. And I'll just, I'm just going to give you a little bit of a definition. We talk about street art. This is more street art. This is graffiti. And we can go into, this is Mara Salvatore, which marks territory. They're a gang, they mark territory, but you can see they use a very specific script. If you guys have done your graffiti homework. This is Bronx, South Bronx. It's called Wild South. So we're just gonna give one example of in El Salvador, it started happening earlier than the other countries. Was 10,000 indigenous were killed in 1 week, to get land, coffee land, and other lands. I mean, lower level Costa Rica and El Salvador and Honduran coffee isn't that good, but once you get into the mountains, you get really good coffee, the high altitude. So they're taking that land, or for other reasons. So then there was popular movements and a guerrilla organizing of both indigenous and mestizo people, meaning mixed. Now, your parents have come here, people have come on both sides because of the Civil War, people who fought with the government and people who were, rebels fighting, but both have been scarred. So I wouldn't judge anyone, because sometimes the people were forced to fight for the military. But the military government in the 70s and 80s and the conservative elite, like people I met, really launched an aggressive campaign against the mostly indigenous peasant left who were saying, let's just have our land, we want to run it communally, blah, blah, blah. So there was all sorts of public assassinations and death squads that were, yes, we don't talk about it in the US, but we're supported by the US government. And in 1980, there was an assassination of Oscar Romero. I have his painting of him here, being Catholic. He was the Archbishop of San Salvador, and he was there's a great movie called Romero. He was a proponent for the liberation of the poor. And the elite in San Salvador was like, do not give service to the poor. Don't give mass to them. In the middle, he refused. He's like, no, I'm not. In the middle of mass, I don't know why they chose to do this. Like the moment that you're consecrating the wine, he was gunned down, and not just once. The paramilitary gunned down 60 times, just total bloodbath, to send a message: don't preach to the poor or the indigenous. Don't offer them safe harbor, blah blah blah. And that's why nuns were getting raped and killed, disappeared. We never find them. And there was a coalition of leftist guerrilla groups formed this thing called the FMLN and launched this offensive against the military rule. In 1981, El Salvadoran military, trained by the US, launched further attacks on the peasants. There was this place in South Carolina called the School of the Americas. And we didn't use that school, oddly. It was run by covert operations. But we trained Latin American, all throughout, military leaders in torture techniques there. So, but 1991, there was a truce. In 1992 and 93, there was a constitution. One of the few victories for the left, and the truth was freedom of expression. Before, they couldn't, speak out. And a court commission found that 100,000 people had died and 85% were killed by government forces. So when they say, oh, but it wasn't just the military and the government, it's also the indigenous. Okay, yes, you're right. The indigenous launched attacks, but 85% of those people, so 85,000, were killed by government forces. And there were put in mass graves. So if someone is disappeared, they're not coming back. No one would, after this truce, no one was made accountable. The war was not taught in school. It's not in textbooks. There's just a suppression of memory, kind of like what happened in Oklahoma in the United States. There was a mass killing in a Black neighborhood, and it's only recently being unearthed. So there was a suppression of memory. So there were all the books were destroyed, all the records. But during the period of the 90s, artists traveled to places like Mexico and studied muralism. And there's this effort to reclaim history for the people. And this is all throughout Central America. So records have been so what to do when records have been burned throughout Central America and Latin America? So if it wasn't being recorded, it was so memory. So those that had memories put it on the wall, put them on the walls in the community memories, memories of the massacre. And now it's much better condition in all these places. But what's happening from the horribleness of the Civil War, people fled. Young men fled, and I know people that didn't get to go to school because of it. And there was gang violence. Last time I was in El Salvador, there was it was dangerous. It's not so bad anymore, depending on where you go or who you talk to. I think it would, because people fled, came to the United States, and were stuck in these areas of LA that had gangs. So El Salvadorans had to fend for themselves and fight, become their own gangs, MS, 18th Street Gang. And then, that's a war that we supported, the US supported, put them in bad positions, whether they were pro-government or, pro-left. And it was violent. People flee. We support it. Then they have to fend for themselves in parts of LA and Southern California, and they become gangs. They get sent to prison. And what happens? They get deported. And that brings the violence back into Central America. So gangs started here, get pumped back in. And so I can't, with Maras, I forget what they call gangs down there, but it's different now. It's changing, but it was extremely violent for a long time. And it was this cycle it's a cycle of colonialism that is still not over. And unfairness. But now people are speaking truth to justice and or truth to power, I guess I would say that, truth to power, like that. And that is what Central American artists do. The best of them. Okay, so on to that. I don't know how to change this. So here's an artist whose style has become important in El Salvador. It's a mural. Here is, a mural. You know what? I lost his name. It looks cartoonish, but then look what it's about, guys. What do you see? Ashlyn? What's going on here?
I see like soldiers like coming in, and like the people from the village, they're like running away.
Mm-hmm. What's happened? Oh, looks like he's been hurt. What's going on here?
It's kind of like blurry. Is that like the crops?
Is it a blurry slide? Should I get a better slide? So what's happening is they're portraying suffering. This is a mural portraying suffering. It's commemorating a massacre in Arcatao, Chalatenango, and includes an image of a soldier tossing a young girl in the air and stabbing her in the back with a machete. So rather than abstract suffering, this is a direct reference to death, reflects the Catholic tradition of images of martyrdom. And this is done in the style of El Salvadoran pottery. Here is how revolutionary guerrillas, like how they, it's from a photograph of them practicing in the forest or jungle. It's a famous photograph, and it's showing women being a part of it all. So these are memories that a town or barrio chose to preserve on their walls, because all text is lost or destroyed. Here's a nice one, a communities rule. So communities will come together and they decide how they want to represent, like hopes and dreams of the FLM, the Revolutionary Party. And here she is. I'm going to be a lawyer. I'm going to be a doctor. I'm going to be a nurse. I'm going to be an editor. I'm going to be a soccer player, a police. This is a feminist statement of the right, although she looks a little sad. And this one is really interesting. So this is Oscar Romero, who I was telling you about, who got killed, was assassinated for advocating for the poor. He's become a saint in the last few years. So there's a quote in Spanish, I'll translate it for you, that was right just before he died. I hope that my blood will create liberty for El Salvador. And you look on his shoulders, they're grapevines, which is a reference to two things: the blood of Christ, which is wine, but also connects him to the land and the fecundity, like the fertility of the community. And so this is in a village. So the murals are to establish community identity, like which crops, or how should we show them, what landscape. And it's so funny. I love this man up on the right, you know. So this is a wall of a mural devoted to Oscar Romero. But this is on the right, you know, he is a local figure who may have been a freedom fighter, but he is connecting himself to a national figure, Romero. So it's like he's trying to say this is someone from our town doing something comparable. It could also be you know, propaganda, like vote for me by associating me, you know, association. And volcanoes are there because they're a national identity of beauty in El Salvador. This is the same man that made that mural, Fernando Lort. And the mayor of the village requested that he made this. And the mayor of the want to use this artist who paints these indigenous themes to decorate the church. So he makes this mosaic about village life and indigenous life, not you know, nothing about war or violence, just indigenous life. And then, you know, we have again Oscar Romero. It was about harmony of the people. And in December, a rightist government a few years ago, before the new government, ordered it to be destroyed. All the tiles were banged away. So the new archbishop gave orders to remove it without consulting the artists or the national government. And it's like, why would they do that? You know, and that sheet is covering the workers who are chipping it away, and nothing's been put back or replaced. And you could just say El Salvador's walls bleed with messages. You know, they felt that you know, apparently indigenous harmonious life was something too left or too political to the right-wing government. But it's not, it wasn't about politics. You know, and it's just so sad. So, you know, since 1992 and since the 90s, Central Americans have used mural painting in particular as history memory campaigns, Salvadorans in particular. And walls became material markers of massacre sites, projections of communities' hopes, homage to fallen martyrs, graffiti. They're like historical lineage. And this was whitewashing, you know. You know, if you think of it, a mural painting, nature, the fact that it's on walls that anybody can see, has something political about it because it's public. And it's a testimony to social movements and social wrong. But whitewashing, on the other hand, is a direct attempt to silence about, and this was just about community and national identity. So the University of El Salvador has a long history of murals. So in fact, actually, I should just tell you, in 1980, there was there was a huge massacre of the students there for protesting. So a huge tradition of muralism is at a lot of museums and some universities in Central America, UAS, and murals continue. And here on their walls, you have, what is this? So here, the idea of the indigenous, we talked about indigenisa is a rebellion. Indigena, Indianismo is like this, we'll get to it, but is this romantic idea of the Indian that's passive, and indigenista, indigena, is very different concepts. Indianismo is a romantic, happy to be exploited, just simple, peaceful Indian. Indigenismo is someone who may have suffered injustice, but who's going to demand action. And this is kind of that sort of thing. Here's a wall commemorating UAS that during the civil wars. And of course, 500 years of resistance is talking about from the time of Columbus. This is me working on a mural there. This is honoring the massacre of the students. So back again, this is kind of the bucolic Indian, the present day, romanticism of Indianismo. And here's another Indianismo, kind of a bucolic Indian life. This is also fine. It's pretty. Here's on the walls of the community of El Salvador, we're starting to get like ancient Indian aspects, and that's indigenismo. So I will, I think I will. There we go, indigenismo. And so we see, though, on this is quite different. There are parts of lots of Guatemala and little bits of Honduras, tiny bit, and tiny bits of El Salvador that have Mayan heritage, but that is really brought to light in the murals at UES, which is basically showing pride in an ancient past and strength and connection. That's indigenismo. Again, maize is important to, all of Central America up through Mesoamerica, Mexico. So, the corn people. Again, indigenismo. And then between borders, I would just say, here's a woman that we're going to see that talks about memory in place. And she's a Salvadoran artist, and she's expanding on the notion of her diaspora. She lives in Washington, D.C., but she grew up in Salvador, but she's half Palestinian. And so you've got, I think it's called Todos los Santos, all the saints, with the Izalco volcano. And so she has the ashes from the volcano with Arabic calligraphy, combining her great-grandfather's prayer of all the saints and martyrs. So she's combining her two lives, because a lot of us are hybrids. you know, from different places and different things anymore. And it's not an either or situation anymore. Like if you're Black and Japanese, you're both and in different, and you perform different psychological roles in different contexts, but we all do. And I think, but what ultimately is overpowering for her is the land where she is. You know, this volcano, I mean, think about it though, it's capable of obliteration, but martyrs and ancestors of her ancestors and martyrs in El Salvador are going to rise from the ashes and remain present to the artist, who feels like she lives in exile because she came to the United States because of the Civil War there. Counter narratives. These are Honduran and Guatemalan artists. And this is, you can tell that these are more trained artists that are coming from, that's more contemporary. What we were looking at were artists during the Civil War. And this is someone that's reading an American writer, Angela Davis, but there is huge problems in Honduras and Guatemala, Honduras especially, but like of prisons, issues in prisons. And here they are, prisons don't disappear social problems, they disappear human beings. So, you know, let's rethink what to do. That's really talking about, it's kind of interesting though, it's in English. Like, I'd actually like to know if that was done in Los Angeles, even though it's a Honduran Guatemalan collective. This is a Guatemalan, Martin Wanam. He's a visual artist and educator whose work looks critically at the historical and social political climate of Central America, specifically examining its impact on queer individuals, etc. So he uses photography, sculpture, and performance as a tool of iconoclasm, like breaking. Iconoclasm means breaking icons, for a constant evaluation of structures like folklore, white supremacy, blah, blah, blah. So this is interesting to me. Blood Bananas is none of that. Blood Bananas is economic. And remember I was talking about Dole Fruit Company? It's like fruit companies have basically, you know, took over indigenous land and without payment, and planted monocrop agricultures, things like bananas, pineapples, but by the banana, that's why they're called banana republics. And he's commenting there on this blood haul, like the loss of land, loss of culture, and human cost of wars over these banana republics since the mid-century, for Dole Fruit Company and their monocrop agriculture. That their land isn't owned by them, it's owned by corporations, you know, that they never, you know, got money for, never asked to give away. And yet it's kind of beautiful, like the red and the green, and, you know, but if you look at the bananas, they have crosses in them, you know. The bananas have a crucifix with Christ on them. So it's like dying in the name of religion, also the connection of power structures, including global companies. You know, are they in cahoots in Central America? And the lack of access to land, you know, the indigenous indigenous never got money, nor did they want to give away the land they are now forced to work on. This is being hollow in my country. I'm not quite sure what that means. Also, but I often that's something for you guys to think what that might mean. Does it have to do with being transnational? Does it have to be being gay? Being in two countries? You know, because he studied in New Mexico. Does it have to do with being gay in a macho culture? I mean, what all could it mean? And this is a performance. It's a video and performance he did in front of people. And this is a graffiti artist duo that spreads feminist messages. They do, this is in front of, so this is Mikey Graf, which is German, interesting. Mikey Graf Ortega, that's on the right, and Swam Francesca on the left, who make up Dolls Clans, are shown in front of one of their graffiti paintings in Tegucigalpa, Honduras, and the mural pays tribute to the Mirabal sisters, also known as Las Mariposas, who opposed the Dominican dictator Rafael Trujillo. And they were really important women in the Dominican Republic's history, and women we should admire and recognize, said Graf. Even though it wasn't something that happened in Honduras, it challenges us to fight for the rights of women. And the name the doll clans refers to a cat call in the country, muñeca, in English doll, and they combined it with clan, tying it to ancient tribes led by women. I didn't know that. And clan is also a word in Spanish that means social group. It's a name that has resonance as they are poised in front of the Mirabal sisters mural. So, you know, it's kind of also like they collaborated with Derechos de Mujer, which is a center. They put the mural because as motorists honk at women catcall them. So it's kind of about that. So it's experiences like this that compel them to team up. Like we created Dolls Clan in Honduras. And you're going to see this when you do the graffiti homework, you know, about women and graffiti. There's a lot of machismo in the culture. I mean, I'm always shocked when I see it, though. I'm like, oh, isn't it over? Huh, okay. It just kind of goes over my head. But she said, they say it's a real problem. You see it in femicide pictures. So Graf is a hip hop artist. So being a woman in Honduras, she says, is very difficult because from the moment we step on the streets, we deal with issues. You know, we go out in fear. And she said in the first 6 months of 2017, 190 women in Honduras were killed, almost one per day, according to the last bulletin. So that's just 6 months. And there were 1,429 reported cases of sexual violence on women. And a third of the survivors were between 10 and 19. And in most cases, it was like a family member or someone they knew. So what she says is violence is a message of possession written on women's bodies. And we need more education to propitiate equality between men and women. And the Dolls Clan fights back through art, like being a woman graffiti artist is like a blow to the system, to a society permeated by this like macho thing. And it's a way to demonstrate that women can also fit in a place that is graffiti. where they're only men and show our art in the same way or even better. So they're transforming their spaces one brushstroke or spray at a time. And I think these are nice and whimsical. I mean, they're not really graffiti. To me, to me, these are street art, because graffiti has to do with lettering. I mean, fundamentally. And that I just had a video of her rapping. So Central American artists counter the criminalization of bodies by focusing on narratives and personal struggles between three identities and three cultures: the European, Spanish conquistador culture, the indigenous culture, and the mestizo, the mix of the two, the third. This is America's Prison, Regina Galindo. And she's basically placed herself and her family in captivity, and museum goers were able to see the family inside a narrow window, and the video recorder documented the family's 72-hour confinement. And the cell was left in the gallery as an installation with remnants of as a drawing and a baby. And it was a Guatemalan artist, and she referenced the rise for-profit detention centers currently imprisoning women and children that are fleeing Central American violence, back then. And I think for her, doing this like with her body and making something visual is like a testimony. Because they're not written down. It's not like something you can read about. It's just a testimony that contrasts with the media about the way we talk about Central Americans, or, leaving their homes. What about looking at the lived experience? It's always written or on the news, but it's like, we have this discourse. Oh, it's an urgent humanitarian situation. And this artwork, as you see, kind of interrogates that discourse that we've come to accept. How we're like, oh, there's a big crisis. And then so people mistreat the detainees at the border. We have people portraying migrants, including unaccompanied children, as gang members and rapists. And this is not one extended to migrants from, say, Cuba or South America or Puerto Rico. Until Trump, Mexican migrants weren't treated that way. But it feeds off this idea of the rise of the gangs and organized crime. But personalizing it and putting it into perspective and looking at it was a wonderful way to show this art. To make and make this seem like it could be your life, watching people living in those situations. Yeah, like kind of like in a cell, what does that do that a newspaper article can't? Think about that by watching and seeing how, it humanizes them. Here is Denise Zavlata. I'm going to skip this. We don't have time. This is a context of race riots. But here I like this one, Danny Zavalata. I'm trying to think. He's kind of a gang member that cleanses himself. You can see in a typical basement shower found in rural houses. But if you look at it, he's El Salvadoran. The blood drips to the floor. What does it reveal on his body? What is his body covered with, guys?
It's covered in blood.
Yeah, and what's underneath that blood? What's on his skin?
I think tattoos.
Yeah. So it's like this points. We're constantly displacing bodies. They leave from the Civil War, they become gangs, they get things, and they come down here. You know, these people are transnational. They, where is home? And it points to what happens to these bodies when they're exposed from the country into another one that equally rejects them, because the blood drips to the cement floor and his body reveals that he has multiple gang tattoos. It's like double displacement, displaced from the US, displaced from El Salvador as he cleanses himself in a rural shower. We don't have time for this. This is a Honduran, talks, these are like, sands, but I think honestly, it's very confrontational. This was a piece, that references the escalating numbers of mysterious prison fires that have been burning inmates alive in the last decade in Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador. And he wants to, he's saying that in his art piece, he's using art to say that it's a farce to say that prisoners rehabilitate in these kind of places where their violence is so unbearable that guards don't even control. There's systematic killing, food maintenance, there's sexual assault, lack of potable water, infestations of rats, no sleeping spaces. Anyway, he bought the ashes of deceased inmates that they couldn't identify. Gabriel Galeano put them in like these Ziploc bags, and you don't even know what the audience didn't know what they are, but he walked in, and the audience, who go to these openings are usually kind of well-to-do people. So he put these bags in their hands. These bags, they didn't know what they were, the Ziploc bags of the remains of these that people burned to death in fires. And he just delivered to them to hands and had them feel like it, just as they would like a manufactured product for consumption. And he was just saying that Hondurans need to confront that their own actions, and the criminalization and the way that they're supporting what the state is doing is strengthening rather than undercutting Central America's violence. And he wanted a physical intervention that required the citizens to kind of open themselves to their own responsibility in it. What would you do? What would you do if someone put that in your hand?
I would be like weirded out. Like, okay.
Of course.
Yeah, I'd be pissed.
Yeah, and this, he's a disruptor, to use he basically put it back on them. You own this. But I think if you were open to it, or weirded out, you might honor the person or and think about what your small role might be in this or how to change. voting for things, not standing up, not taking activism. That would be hard. That would be hard. It'd be really, really profound. I think anyone that came there left a little change. Criminalization of space. This is just kind of a graffiti take. This is Danny Zavaleta in El Salvador, El Tour, and they're like maps of a city. And he said, he takes a tourist map and he's like, let's look at what's really going on, that's more faithful to like the life of the city. I mean, this is a place, El Salvador, where some bus lines are just so dangerous, you don't ride the bus. And it's like the one area in pink is kind of the semi-wealthy area. I mean, wealth is relative, but he called it Disneylandia. But this is old. This is 2006. Things have changed, but there were turf wars that terrorized citizens. And so he tags different territories for their behavior. What was MS-12? What is 18th Street, which is two different gangs. And then he evokes this war, like the image on the right with the body walking into distance with the FLM slogan. Hasta la victoria siempre, and other figures on the left are posed to attack, you know, but the Salvadoran beach show place underneath a military flag, you know, the phrase replaces what would be a body brutalized by the military. And here you've got a graffiti artist. But this piece, El Tour, shows how, in addition to inscribed bodies, a transnational gang culture has resulted in inscribed cities that convey social boundaries within the self and between others by reconfiguring territories and spaces by graffiti and visual culture. I mean, you can see graffiti tags, like it's political, like this is our territory, this is our territory. And it's not always that bad, because sometimes it can create a safe zone that's marked by that, depending on who runs it. But these are transnational. But this is Zavaleta's image underscores the violence that dominated Salvador's culture, installing the country's efforts to establish a unique national identity, a distinctly Salvadoran art. So up until a while ago, El Salvador's export was a lot of these transnational gangs, but I left at this museum feeling hopeful, knowing that each new act of creation is an act of faith in a better future. Like a uniquely Central American art may yet be established. You know, all these people that are working today that we've seen are like going forward with new art and new expressions, and they're not afraid to speak truth to power. These are what I'm saying. So this is 18th Street. Like this is, their font is very Gothic. And why am I colluding? It's political, it's power, it's territory. This is true graffiti. Now, I don't want to get into the numbers of deaths, you know, but I hear a lot of, you know, sovereigns, oh, it's so much better. Well, you know, yes and no. This is Marva Sutra, which I actually love their lettering. I'm not saying I like the people, but they do this really comes from LA. This is a real LA Cholo style. It's kind of like this Gothic, you know, old like Shakespearean letters, just like, you know, but that tells you where their boundaries are. And then there was a great Salvadorian poet, Roque Antonio Dalton Garcia, known as Roque Dalton, and he wrote these emotionally strong, sometimes sarcastic, image-loaded works dealing with life, death, love, and politics. He was exiled during the Civil War in Chile and Cuba and Mexico. And then he came back and got really involved in the Civil War, joining the People's Revolution Party, but he was executed. But that happens. His own party executed him. And that happens when revolutionaries turn in on themselves. The most commonly accepted version of facts suggested Dalton was mistakenly accused of operating as an agent for the CIA. In this way, his murder bears resemblance to that of Anna Maria Aquash, an American Indian movement activist who was mistakenly identified as an FBI informant. But he's painted over the walls. So here is London graffiti in the 1980s, and here. Punk is not dead. Roque Dalton. So this was a punk is not dead because, you know, it was saying disco killed it or something. And here is like, Roque Dalton is not dead. The struggle continues. Why now? Because the difficulties in the past, the present, the globalization, modes of expression, you know, he's a member of the guerrillas, but he was killed by the guerrillas, you know, and the house where he lived, they wrote, you know, we kill poets in front of it. So now things are less overt, but these are things I actually saw, these social political conrays, like this poet is still alive in us. It's just a funny Mexican chain. Here are also from the Civil War, just absolutely beautiful paintings of, you know, you don't need words for this. These look like martyrs, like a Christian martyr, you know, these are all in the church that drawings where Oscar Romero was killed. And here is the Salvadoran flag with that tenebrism, as you remember, the darks and the inky darks. And contemporary arts is this myth we have of globalism. We've got this strong indigenous Superman, you know, I think this photograph, I forget who the artist was, but kind of the antidote to the quiet woman. And, you know, with her little, you know, humble home. She doesn't look like she's going to suffer any fools. She's just as strong as that woman we saw in the Mickalene Thomas, all that pattern painting of the woman lying. She's just as strong. She's just as strong as a Mickalene Thomas model. Remember her lying and like with all the fancy outfit and all the patterns. And the last thing, these are little like gifts that people give to each other in El Salvador. They're like little pods. I break everyone I've ever had. So if you ever go there, can you bring me back one? But it also, and usually inside them, there's like hearts or like cute imagery. But here is a whole setup of like a sweatshop, you know, people making clothes for people at H&M or, you know, fast fashion. And I'm trying to think if I have anything more. That's it. So I hope you had found that interesting. We've gone over, but